In the heart of London, near the iconic Buckingham Palace, a royal guard named Private James Whittaker stood tall and proud. His red tunic, polished boots, and towering bearskin hat made him look like a statue carved out of discipline itself. Tourists snapped photos, children pointed excitedly, and some simply walked past without giving him a second glance. For most people, guards like James were just part of the scenery, a symbol of tradition and order in the bustling city. But this morning felt different. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves from nearby trees. The sun had risen only an hour ago, casting golden light across the park where James was stationed. Though his posture was as rigid as ever, his mind wandered slightly. He thought about his family back home, the stories his grandmother used to tell him about resilience, and how far he'd come despite the challenges life threw at him. Growing up in a multicultural household, James had faced prejudice more times than he cared to count. Yet here he was, standing guard for one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, a testament to his hard work and determination. As the minutes ticked by, the usual sounds of the park surrounded him. Birds chirping, distant laughter, and the soft hum of conversations blending into the background. Everything seemed peaceful, until it wasn't. A man appeared on the edge of the park, walking briskly with a large dog straining against its leash. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the scene. People often passed through the area with their pets, but something about this man's demeanor caught James's attention. His jaw was clenched tightly, his eyes darting around with unmistakable hostility. The man stopped a few feet away from the guarded perimeter. James instinctively straightened his stance, ready for whatever might come next. It wasn't uncommon for tourists or locals to approach the guards out of curiosity, sometimes even trying to get a reaction for fun. But this man didn't seem curious. He looked angry. Very angry. James kept his expression neutral, as per protocol, but his senses were on high alert. The man muttered something under his breath, too low for James to hear clearly. Then, louder, he said, "You think you're so important, don't you?" Standing there all high and mighty, James remained silent, knowing better than to engage. But the man wasn't done. He stepped closer, pulling the dog along with him. The animal growled softly, sensing its owner's tension. "You're not even fully." The man sneered, trailing off into a string of insults that left no doubt about his intentions. James swallowed hard, focusing on maintaining his composure. He reminded himself of his training, of the countless hours spent learning to stay calm under pressure. Still, his heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just another day at the post. This was personal. The man continued hurling words laced with venom, each one designed to provoke a reaction. James knew exactly what the man wanted: to break him, to shatter the image of dignity and strength that came with being a royal guard. But James refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, he locked eyes with the man, silently daring him to try harder. Little did either of them know, things were about to escalate in ways neither could have predicted. The tension in the air grew thicker with each passing second. The man, whose name was Nigel Hargrove, had clearly come to this park with one goal in mind: to stir trouble. His face twisted into a sneer as he continued spewing hateful words, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby pedestrians. Some stopped to watch, unsure of what might happen next, while others hurried away, sensing that something ugly was brewing. Nigel's dog, a German shepherd named Max, was visibly agitated by now. The animal paced back and forth, tugging at its leash as if sensing its owner's anger. Its ears were pinned back, and deep growls rumbled from its throat. James, though outwardly calm, could feel his muscles tense beneath his uniform. He knew better than to react emotionally. Years of training had drilled into him the importance of staying composed, no matter how provoking the situation became. But Nigel wasn't satisfied with just hurling insults. He wanted chaos. With a sudden jerk on the leash, he yanked Max closer to James, pointing directly at the guard. "You think you're tough. You think you're above everyone else. Nigel spat, his voice dripping with venom. Without warning, he unclipped the leash and gave the dog a sharp command. Go get him. Time seemed to slow down as Max lunged forward, propelled by instinct and obedience to his master. The crowd gasped audibly, some stepping back in fear while others cried out in alarm. James didn't have time to think. He acted purely on reflex. Years of military drills and self-defense training kicked in as he swiftly sidestepped the charging dog, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. His movements were precise, calculated, and utterly controlled. Despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, James forced himself to stay focused. He couldn't let panic take over. Instead, he raised his voice, firm and commanding, shouting, "Stop!" The sound echoed through the park, cutting through the commotion like a knife. To everyone's astonishment, Max hesitated mid-stride, his paws skidding against the pavement. For a brief moment, the dog froze, caught between its natural aggression and the authority in James's tone. Nigel, however, wasn't about to back down. Seeing that his plan hadn't gone exactly as he'd hoped, he shouted more commands, urging Max to attack again. But something strange happened. Instead of charging once more, the dog stood rooted in place, its tail tucked low and its body language shifting from aggressive to uncertain. It was almost as if the animal sensed that James wasn't a threat, or worse for Nigel, that James was someone who deserved respect. James took advantage of the fleeting pause. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself into a crouch, keeping his eyes locked on Max. His hand extended slightly, palm open and non-threatening. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "You don't need to do this." Passers-by watched in stunned silence, their initial fear giving way to fascination as they realized what was happening. The guard wasn't fighting back or lashing out. He was trying to connect with the dog. Meanwhile, Nigel's frustration boiled over. His face turned red with rage as he screamed at both James and Max. "What are you doing? Attack him, you stupid mutt," he bellowed, stomping his foot like a child throwing a tantrum. But his words fell on deaf ears. Max remained still, his gaze fixed on James as if waiting for further instruction. It was a surreal sight, a scene that defied all expectations. People began whispering among themselves, their reactions ranging from disbelief to admiration. One woman clutched her phone, recording the entire incident, while another man shook his head in disgust at Nigel's behavior. A group of teenagers standing nearby muttered comments under their breath, calling Nigel names far kinder than he deserved. For James, every second felt like an eternity. He knew the situation was far from resolved. Nigel was unpredictable, and Max, though momentarily calmed, was still a powerful animal capable of causing harm. Yet James refused to give in to fear or anger. This wasn't just about defending himself anymore. It was about proving that even in the face of hatred, compassion could prevail. As the seconds ticked by, it became clear that the outcome of this confrontation would depend not on brute force, but on understanding and patience. And though neither James nor Nigel realized it yet, the choices made in the next few moments would leave a lasting impact, not just on them, but on everyone watching. James's heart was pounding like a drum, but his face betrayed none of the turmoil inside him. He had trained for countless scenarios during his time in the military. How to handle weapons, how to respond to threats, and even how to stay calm under fire, but nothing could have fully prepared him for this exact moment. A snarling dog stood only feet away, its teeth bared and muscles coiled, ready to strike again at any second. Behind it, Nigel shouted more commands, his voice harsh and grating, egging the animal on. Yet James didn't falter. His mind raced through the lessons he learned over years of service. One particular memory came flooding back. An instructor once told him that animals respond not just to actions but to energy. If you showed fear or aggression, they mirrored it. But if you remained calm and confident, they often followed suit. Drawing strength from that thought, James took a deep breath and straightened his posture. Though his body screamed at him to step back, he held his ground, refusing to let fear dictate his next move. With slow, deliberate movements, James raised his hand slightly, palm facing outward, signaling peace rather than confrontation. "Easy," he said firmly, his tone commanding yet gentle. The word hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Max hesitated again, his ears twitching as if trying to process what he was hearing. For a split second, the dog's stance softened, his growl fading into silence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but James noticed it immediately. Encouraged by this small victory, James decided to take another calculated risk. Lowering himself into a crouch, he kept his gaze steady on Max, making sure not to make any sudden movements that might spook the dog further. "You're okay," he murmured softly, repeating the phrase several times. His voice carried a warmth that contrasted sharply with Nigel's angry shouts. "You don't need to listen to him. You're safe here." The crowd around them watched in stunned silence, their earlier murmurs dying down as they witnessed something extraordinary unfolding before their eyes. Some people exchanged glances, unsure whether to feel relieved or worried. Others pulled out their phones, capturing every detail of the scene. A young boy standing beside his mother whispered, "Is he gonna be okay?" His mother shushed him gently, but kept her camera rolling, unable to look away. Meanwhile, Nigel's frustration reached new heights. Seeing his plan unravel right in front of him sent him into a rage. "What are you doing?" he yelled, stomping toward James and Max. "Get over here, you useless beast." But his words seemed to have the opposite effect. Instead of obeying, Max turned his head slightly, almost dismissively, keeping his focus on James. It was as if the dog had made up its mind about who deserved trust. And it wasn't Nigel. James seized the opportunity. Still speaking in soothing tones, he extended his hand a little farther, giving Max the option to approach without forcing the issue. "That's it," he encouraged quietly. "Come on." The dog's tail flicked uncertainly, then wagged once, twice. Slowly, cautiously, Max began inching closer, his earlier hostility replaced by curiosity. When the dog finally stopped just a few inches away, sniffing James's gloved hand, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the onlookers. Nigel, however, was livid. "This is ridiculous," he bellowed, storming forward in an attempt to reclaim control. But before he could reach them, James stood up slowly, placing himself between Nigel and Max. His presence was imposing, his tall frame radiating authority, despite his calm demeanor. "Stay back," James warned, his voice low but firm. There was no room for argument in those two words. They were a clear boundary, one Nigel instinctively recognized. For a moment, the man froze, caught off guard by James's unwavering resolve. Then, realizing he was losing not just the dog, but also the audience, Nigel doubled down on his insults, directing them at James once more. But the words fell flat. No one paid attention anymore. All eyes were on James and Max, locked in a quiet exchange that spoke volumes about trust and understanding. By now, the situation had shifted dramatically. What started as a hostile encounter was transforming into something else entirely, a demonstration of patience, empathy, and leadership. And though James didn't know it yet, this moment would define not just his day but his legacy. As Max sat down obediently beside him, leaning lightly against his leg, James allowed himself a fleeting smile. In that instant, he proved that true strength lies not in domination, but in connection. As the tension in the park began to ease, James took a moment to assess the situation. Max, the once aggressive German shepherd, was now sitting calmly by his side, his tail thumping softly against the ground. The dog's transformation from a snarling threat to a docile companion was nothing short of remarkable. It wasn't just luck. It was the result of James's patience and understanding. But Nigel, on the other hand, looked like a man whose world was crumbling around him. Nigel stood frozen for a moment, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury. His shouts had grown hoarse, but they carried no weight anymore. No one in the crowd paid him any attention. Instead, all eyes were glued to James and Max. Even some of the tourists who had initially been frightened were now smiling, snapping photos and whispering words of admiration. Nigel realized he'd lost control, not just of his dog, but of the entire situation. He clenched his fists tightly, muttering under his breath as if trying to summon some shred of dignity. James, sensing the shift in dynamics, decided it was time to address the growing audience. He knew this wasn't just about him or Nigel anymore. It was about setting an example. Standing tall in his uniform, he turned slightly toward the crowd, his voice clear and steady. "This isn't about me," he began, pausing briefly to let his words sink in. "And it's not about him either." He gestured subtly toward Nigel without pointing directly at him, careful not to escalate things further. "It's about how we treat each other, and how we choose to respond when someone tries to provoke us." The crowd fell silent, hanging onto every word. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. A woman holding her child's hand whispered, "He's right," loud enough for those nearby to hear. James continued, his tone calm but firm. "Hate doesn't solve anything. Violence doesn't make anyone stronger. What matters is how we rise above it." His speech wasn't rehearsed or polished. It came straight from the heart, and that sincerity resonated deeply with everyone present. Even the teenagers who had earlier mocked Nigel seemed moved, their expressions softening as they listened. One older man in the crowd murmured, "That's leadership right there," earning nods of approval from those around him. Meanwhile, Max remained glued to James's side, occasionally nudging his leg affectionately. The bond between them was undeniable, forged in moments of crisis and mutual trust. Watching this interaction, Nigel grew increasingly agitated. He tried to reclaim his authority over the dog, shouting commands like, "Come here," and "Get back here, you worthless animal." But Max ignored him completely, refusing to budge from James's protective presence. Frustrated beyond belief, Nigel finally stomped forward, reaching out to grab the leash dangling loosely from Max's collar. However, before he could lay a finger on the dog, James stepped between them, blocking his path. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," James said evenly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Nigel froze mid-reach, glaring daggers at James. For the first time since the confrontation began, Nigel looked unsure of himself. The confidence that had fueled his hateful behavior was crumbling, replaced by shame and anger directed inward. The crowd, witnessing this exchange, erupted into quiet cheers and applause. People clapped respectfully, their support unmistakable. A young girl holding a stuffed animal even shouted, "Good job, soldier." Her innocent enthusiasm brought smiles to the faces of many, lightening the mood considerably. But James didn't bask in the praise. Instead, he knelt down beside Max again, speaking softly to the dog. "You're safe now," he reassured him, scratching behind Max's ears gently. The gesture was simple yet profound, a reminder that kindness can disarm even the most volatile situations. Max responded by resting his head on James's knee, his body language radiating trust and gratitude. As the scene unfolded, something remarkable happened. Nigel's bravado crumbled entirely. Defeated and humiliated, he muttered curses under his breath and backed away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. No one followed him or cared where he went. All attention remained on James and Max, the unlikely pair who had turned a tense standoff into a lesson in humanity. By the time police officers arrived, alerted by concerned bystanders, the immediate danger had passed. Witnesses eagerly recounted what they'd seen, praising James for his composure and compassion. As officers questioned those involved, James simply stood quietly, his hand resting reassuringly on Max's back. Little did he know, this incident would soon ripple far beyond the park, inspiring countless others and proving that true strength lies not in domination, but in empathy. When the police officers arrived, their presence brought a new layer of seriousness to the scene. Dressed in crisp uniforms and armed with notebooks, they quickly assessed the situation. By now, Nigel had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only his lingering hostility and an abandoned leash that lay coiled on the ground like a forgotten weapon. The crowd, still buzzing from what they'd witnessed, eagerly stepped forward to share their accounts. One elderly woman, clutching her handbag tightly, spoke first. "That man." She pointed vaguely in the direction Nigel had fled. "He was shouting hateful things at this young guard here." Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was clear. "And then he set his dog on him. It was horrible." Others nodded vigorously in agreement, chiming in with snippets of their own observations. A teenage boy added, "But the guard didn't fight back or anything. He just stayed calm and talked to the dog." The officers listened intently, jotting down notes as James stood quietly beside Max. Despite the scrutiny, James remained composed, answering questions politely when asked. "I followed standard protocol," he explained simply. "My priority was de-escalation." His words carried authority without arrogance, earning nods of respect from the officers. They could see for themselves how the situation had unfolded, the hostile man gone, the dog sitting peacefully by James's side, and the crowd unmistakably on the guard's side. As the investigation continued, the officers turned their attention to Max. One officer crouched down to examine the dog, who wagged his tail lazily in response. "Seems friendly enough now," the officer remarked, scratching Max behind the ears. James explained how Max had initially been aggressive, but calmed down after being treated with patience and care. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "You've got a way with animals, don't you?" he said with a small smile. But there was more to Max's story than met the eye. When questioned further about the dog's ownership, witnesses revealed details about Nigel's behavior earlier that morning. Several people mentioned seeing him yelling at Max before the confrontation even began, yanking the leash harshly whenever the dog hesitated to obey. These accounts painted a troubling picture, not just of Nigel's racism toward James, but also of potential neglect toward the animal under his care. The officers exchanged glances, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Neglecting or mistreating a pet wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. With this new information, they decided to file charges against Nigel, not only for public disturbance and inciting violence, but also for suspected animal cruelty. As they wrapped up their initial report, one officer turned to James and asked, "What should we do about the dog in the meantime?" James hesitated for a moment, glancing down at Max. The dog gazed up at him with trusting eyes, as if sensing the weight of the decision being made. After everything that had happened, sending Max back to Nigel felt wrong, not just morally, but practically. "If possible," James said carefully, "I'd like to take temporary custody of him until a permanent solution can be found." The request caught everyone off guard, including Max, whose tail thumped harder against the pavement upon hearing James's words. The officers conferred briefly before agreeing. Given the circumstances, and considering James's obvious ability to handle the dog responsibly, it seemed like the best course of action. "We'll need to get approval from the court," one officer clarified, "but assuming that goes through, you'll be allowed to keep him temporarily." Relief washed over James, though he kept his expression neutral. He knew caring for Max wouldn't be easy, especially given his demanding schedule as a royal guard. But something inside him felt compelled to help. Perhaps it was the memory of his own childhood, growing up in a household where resilience and empathy were taught as values worth fighting for. Or perhaps it was simply the connection he'd formed with Max during those tense moments in the park. Whatever the reason, James was determined to give the dog a second chance. As the officers finalized their notes and dispersed the crowd, James knelt down beside Max again. "Looks like you're stuck with me for a while," he said with a faint smile, ruffling the dog's fur affectionately. Max responded by licking his hand, his tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fly off. The sight drew smiles from the remaining bystanders, many of whom lingered just a little longer to watch the heartwarming interaction. By the time the park returned to its usual rhythm, James and Max were already forming a bond that transcended words. What started as a dangerous encounter had transformed into something far greater. A partnership built on trust, compassion, and mutual respect. And though neither of them realized it yet, the days following the incident in the park were a whirlwind for James. News of his calm and compassionate response spread like wildfire, thanks to videos captured by witnesses that quickly went viral online. Social media platforms buzzed with praise for the Royal Guard, who had disarmed a tense situation, not with force, but with kindness. Comments poured in from people around the world, calling him a hero and an example of grace under pressure. Memes featuring James's stoic face alongside captions like "When hate meets humanity" flooded timelines, turning him into an unexpected internet sensation. Back at Buckingham Palace, James returned to his duties as usual, though things felt different now. His fellow guards greeted him with knowing smiles, some even clapping him on the back in admiration. "You've made us all look good," one of them joked during a break. But despite the newfound attention, James remained humble. He brushed off compliments, insisting he'd only done what anyone else in his position would have done. Deep down, however, he couldn't deny feeling a sense of pride, not because of the fame, but because his actions had resonated with so many people. Meanwhile, Max settled into his temporary home with surprising ease. James had been worried about balancing his responsibilities as a royal guard with caring for an energetic German shepherd, but Max proved to be more adaptable than expected. During James's shifts, trusted colleagues helped watch over the dog, ensuring he was fed, walked, and given plenty of attention. Max seemed to thrive under this new care, his personality blossoming as the days passed. Gone was the anxious, aggressive demeanor he'd shown under Nigel's ownership. In its place was a loyal, playful companion who adored James unconditionally. Word of Max's transformation reached the public through interviews James gave to local news outlets. When asked how he managed to connect with such a troubled animal, James shrugged modestly. "It's not about me," he said. "Max just needed someone to show him patience and love. That's all any living being really wants, to feel safe and valued." His words struck a chord with viewers, sparking conversations about compassion and second chances. Nigel, on the other hand, faced mounting consequences for his actions. The court case against him moved swiftly, fueled by overwhelming evidence from witnesses and the police report. Videos of the incident played repeatedly in court, leaving no doubt about Nigel's behavior. In addition to charges of public disturbance and inciting violence, he was found guilty of animal neglect based on testimonies describing how he treated Max before the confrontation. The judge handed down a hefty fine and mandated anger management counseling, along with a ban on owning pets in the future. While Nigel faded into obscurity, James and Max became unlikely symbols of hope. Their story inspired countless discussions about overcoming prejudice and treating others, whether human or animal, with empathy. Schools began using their encounter as a teaching moment, encouraging students to reflect on how they respond to conflict. Even charities dedicated to rescuing abused animals saw a surge in donations, with many citing James and Max as inspiration. As weeks turned into months, James petitioned the court to adopt Max permanently once Nigel's legal troubles were resolved. Given Nigel's inability to provide proper care, and Max's obvious attachment to James, the request was granted without hesitation. On the day the adoption papers were finalized, James took Max to Hyde Park for a long walk. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting golden light across the grass as Max bounded ahead, chasing leaves and sniffing every tree trunk with boundless curiosity. Watching Max play, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about saving a dog from a bad situation. It was about proving that change is possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Max had come a long way from the frightened, defensive creature he'd been when Nigel unleashed him in the park. Now, he was a symbol of resilience and renewal, much like James himself. By the time they headed home, the bond between man and dog was undeniable. Strangers passing by smiled warmly, recognizing the pair from news reports. Some stopped to pet Max, remarking on how lucky he was to have found such a loving guardian. Others thanked James for reminding them of the power of kindness. As they walked side by side, James realized something profound. Sometimes, life gives you challenges not to break you, but to help you grow, and to show the world what true strength looks like. As weeks turned into months, James and Max grew inseparable. Their bond deepened with each passing day, transforming them from an unlikely pair thrust together by circumstance into a true team built on trust and mutual respect. Max became more than just a dog. He was James's shadow, his companion, and in many ways, his greatest teacher. The once anxious German shepherd now greeted every morning with boundless energy, wagging his tail so hard it seemed like it might never stop. James dedicated himself to Max's rehabilitation with the same discipline and focus he applied to his duties as a royal guard. He enrolled in obedience classes, not because Max needed much correction anymore, but because James wanted to ensure the dog felt confident and secure in every situation. Together, they practiced commands, played fetch in the park, and explored new trails outside the city. With every outing, Max's personality shone brighter. His playful barks echoed through the streets, drawing smiles from passersby who recognized him from news stories. But James didn't stop there. Knowing Max had endured neglect under Nigel's care, he went above and beyond to give the dog the life he deserved. He researched nutrition, consulted veterinarians, and even learned how to groom Max himself. On weekends, they visited local shelters, where James volunteered his time helping other neglected animals find loving homes. Max tagged along happily, serving as both mascot and morale booster for the shelter staff and residents alike. Seeing the big dog wagging his tail and soaking up affection inspired hope in everyone around him. The public continued to follow their journey closely. Social media updates featuring Max, whether lounging in the barracks during James's downtime or trotting proudly beside him on patrol, garnered thousands of likes and comments. Fans nicknamed him the Royal Dog, a title that fit perfectly given his growing role in James's life. One viral photo showed Max wearing a tiny replica of James's bearskin hat perched lopsidedly on his head. The image sparked laughter worldwide, with fans praising the duo for bringing joy to people's lives. Max's presence wasn't just limited to off-duty hours. Once cleared by higher-ups, he joined James during certain non-ceremonial duties, becoming an unofficial part of the regiment. Soldiers quickly warmed to the dog, finding comfort in his calming demeanor. During stressful drills or long hours standing guard, Max's antics provided much-needed levity. Whether it was sneaking socks from unsuspecting recruits or flopping dramatically onto the grass during training sessions, he brought a sense of lightness to an otherwise rigid environment. Beyond the barracks, Max also became a symbol of unity and resilience. Schools invited James to speak about their story, emphasizing themes of empathy, patience, and second chances. Children listened wide-eyed as James described how fear and anger could be overcome with understanding and compassion. Max sat quietly at his side during these talks, occasionally resting his head on James's boot as if adding his own silent endorsement. Teachers reported that students left these sessions feeling inspired, many vowing to treat others and animals with greater kindness. Even within the Royal Guard, attitudes began to shift subtly. While discipline remained paramount, there was a noticeable softening among the ranks, a recognition that strength wasn't just about stoicism or physical prowess. It was also about vulnerability, connection, and the courage to choose empathy over hostility. James's actions had set a precedent, proving that being a protector meant more than guarding buildings or traditions. It meant safeguarding values like compassion and humanity. For James, the transformation extended beyond Max. Caring for the dog reminded him of why he joined the military in the first place, to serve others. Each challenge they faced together, from mastering new tricks to navigating crowded streets, reinforced his belief in the power of perseverance. And while he still encountered moments of prejudice due to his mixed heritage, he no longer let it weigh him down. Instead, he channeled those experiences into fuel for positive change, using his platform to advocate for equality and understanding. By the time winter arrived, blanketing London in a crisp layer of frost, James and Max were fixtures not just in the palace grounds, but in the hearts of countless admirers. They weren't just man and dog. They were proof that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge when we choose to nurture it. As they strolled through the park one chilly evening, Max bounding ahead and James following close behind, it was clear their story was far from over. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a legacy of love, resilience, and unwavering loyalty that would continue to inspire for years to come. Months had passed since the day James and Max first crossed paths in that park near Buckingham Palace. What began as a tense, hate-filled encounter had blossomed into something far greater, a story of redemption, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. Their journey wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about showing the world what could happen when compassion replaced anger and understanding triumphed over prejudice. James received formal recognition for his actions during an award ceremony held at the regiment's headquarters. Dressed in full uniform, he stood tall as officials praised him not only for upholding duty, but also for demonstrating humanity in the face of hatred. The room erupted in applause when Max trotted onto the stage, wearing his miniature bearskin hat, to sit proudly beside James. It was a moment neither man nor dog would ever forget. As medals were pinned to James's chest, he glanced down at Max, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. "This is as much your honor as it is mine," James whispered softly, earning smiles from everyone present. The impact of their story reached far beyond London. News outlets around the globe continued to feature them, highlighting how one act of kindness could ripple outward, inspiring countless others. Animal shelters reported record numbers of adoptions, with many citing James and Max's story as motivation for adopting rescue dogs. Social media campaigns sprang up under hashtags like #BeLikeJames and #SecondChancesMatter, encouraging people to treat each other and animals with empathy and respect. Even schools incorporated their tale into anti-bullying programs, teaching children that responding to negativity with positivity can change lives. For James, life took on a new rhythm. His days were still filled with the responsibilities of being a royal guard, but now they included Max by his side. Whether standing post or walking through the city streets, the pair became synonymous with hope and unity. Strangers approached them regularly, sharing stories of how their example had inspired personal changes. A young boy once handed James a drawing of himself and Max, saying, "You showed me it's okay to be brave and kind." Moments like these reminded James why his decision to step forward mattered so deeply. Max, too, thrived in ways no one could have predicted. Once a nervous, mistreated animal, he transformed into a confident, joyful ambassador for love and second chances. His playful antics brought laughter wherever he went, while his calm demeanor comforted those in need. At charity events, fundraisers, and community gatherings, Max stole hearts effortlessly, proving that even creatures who've known pain can radiate happiness when given the chance. As time went on, Nightle faded further into obscurity, his name becoming little more than a footnote in the larger narrative of James and Max's legacy. While he served his penalties quietly, they chose to focus on building bridges rather than dwelling on past grievances. In interviews, James often emphasized forgiveness, explaining that holding onto bitterness only harms oneself. "We all make mistakes," he said simply. "What matters is learning from them and choosing to do better." By spring, James and Max had become fixtures in London's cultural landscape. Statues of guards outside Buckingham Palace seemed less imposing when passers-by spotted the real-life duo nearby. James steadfast in his duty, Max wagging his tail beside him. Together, they represented strength tempered with gentleness, tradition blended with innovation. They weren't just symbols of the monarchy anymore. They were symbols of hope for humanity itself. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through Hyde Park, James paused to watch children playing tag near the fountain. Max sat obediently at his feet, panting happily in the warm breeze. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The laughter of kids, the rustling leaves overhead, the quiet companionship between man and dog. James knelt down to scratch behind Max's ears, meeting his gaze squarely. "You changed my life, buddy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Max responded with a soft bark, leaning into James's touch. In that simple exchange, their story came full circle. From chaos to calm, from hostility to harmony, they proved that true strength lies not in domination, but in connection. And though their journey wasn't without challenges, it was a testament to the power of patience, courage, and love. As they walked away together, leaving footprints on the sunlit path behind them, one thing was certain: James and Max weren't just changing their own lives. They were changing the world, one paw step at a time.